I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Calcasieu Parish Police Jury for Tuesday, July 19th, 2016. We ask that you please stand. Mr. Collins is going to do the prayer and the pledge.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Praise, give, and honor, and praise to Almighty God for this day, who is the head of my life. Would you all please join me and pray with me for the hurricane prayer? Look at the boat. O God, Master of this passing world, hear the humble voices of your children. The sea of Galilee obeys your order and return to its own quietude. You are still the master of the land and sea. We live in the shadow of the danger which we have no control. The Gulf, like a provoked and angry giant, can awake from its single lethargy and overstep its conventional boundaries. Bathe our lands with great chaos and disaster. During this hurricane season, we turn to your love, Father. Spare us from past tragedies, whose memories are still so vivid, and whose wounds seem to refuse to heal with the passing of time. O virgin star of the sea, our beloved mother, we ask you to plead with your Son on our behalf, so that spared from the calamities common to this area, and animated with the true spirit of gratitude, we walk in the footsteps of your divine Son, to reach heaven and Jerusalem, where storms eternity awaits us. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Yes, sir. Mr. Enterpont?
Here.
Mr. Barris?
Here.
Mr. Brame?
Here.
Mr. Collins?
Here.
Mr. Farnham?
Here.
Mr. Guidry?
Here.
Mr. Hillary?
Here.
Mr. Hunter?
Here.
Mr. Latour?
Here.
Ms. Mayo? Here. Vice President McMillan?
Here.
Mr. Scott?
Here.
Mrs. Trimmy? Here. Mr. White?
Here.
And President Landry.
Here.
Everyone's present.
Thank you, Ms. Cathy. Before we get started, we ask that everyone please silence their cell phones. If you wish to speak on any item that's on the agenda tonight, we ask that you fill out one of these blue slips you'll find there at the front of the room, and you can hand it to someone here at the staff desk. Thank you. Item 4, take appropriate action on applications for liquor and beer permits. Mr. Crane.
Mr. President, we don't have any applications before you tonight. No action necessary.
Very
Move
good.
to receive.
Thank you. Got a motion to receive report from
Second.
Mr. Crane and a second. Seeing no objection, motion carries. Item 5, consideration of approving payment of all current invoices.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Gilrery, second by Mr. White. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 6, consideration of approving the minutes of the regular meeting of the
Move on
Police
6.
dated June 23rd, 2016. Have a motion by Mr. McMillan, a second by Mr. Guidry. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 7, adopt an ordinance to levy the following 2016 maintenance tax millage rates as submitted by the parish tax assessor. Criminal Justice System maintenance, 3.02 mills. Courthouse Complex and Correctional Center maintenance, 3.12 mills. Mosquito control maintenance, 2.30 mills. Airport District Number 1 maintenance, 0.60 mills. Burton Coliseum and Agricultural Services maintenance, 1.43 mills. Health Unit maintenance, 2.37 mills. Juvenile Detention maintenance, 3.33 mills. Road and Drainage maintenance, 3.88 mills. Ward 3 Fire Protection District Number 2 maintenance, 11.54 mills. Library maintenance, 5.51 mills. Sewage District Number 11 of Wards 3 and 8 maintenance, 7.02 mills. Waterworks District Number 5 of Wards 3 and 8 maintenance, 5.24 mills. Waterworks District Number 5 of Wards 3 and 8 debt service, 0.25 mills. Waterworks District Number 2 of Ward 4 maintenance, 6.38 mills.
Motion to adopt all villages.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. McMillan, second by Mr. Enterpont. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Mr. Farnham.
I'm assuming that all these are rollbacks?
Yes, sir. The only exception, and I need Tammy's help, there's one, maybe two, where the renewal election, just the timing was the same, but those aren't roll forwards. It's just what the election.
Right.
Which, can you tell? Might have been the,
maybe the water district too.
It's just by the nature of timing
timing.
that they end up having to be
That's the only
same.
reason, but yes,
Okay.
other than that, they're all rollbacks to the.
Thank you very
reassessment.
much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Farnum. Is there any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 8, adopt an ordinance to levy the following 2016 general purposes tax millage rates as submitted by the parish tax assessor. Calcasieu Parish, except the city of Lake Charles, town of Benton, city of DeQuincy, city of Sulphur, and city of Westlake, 4.18 mils. Sorry about that. Calcasieu Parish within corporate limits of the city of Lake Charles, town of Benton, city of DeQuincy, city of Sulphur, and the city of Westlake, 2.09 mils.
Move to adopt.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Hunter and a second by Mr. Farnum. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Mr. Farnum?
I'm assuming the same thing applies to these.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good. Any further discussion? Objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 9.
Move on
Take
9.
appropriate action
Second.
on a request by Mark Vell et al. To rezone from agriculture to heavy industrial to revise case EX 03-027-15 to allow a second borrow pit of 34 acres in the 1900 block of Helms Road in Ward 3. The Planning and Zoning Board met on Monday, July 18, 2016, and voted unanimously to recommend that the request be granted with stipulations. Had a motion by Mr. Scott and a second by Mr. Brame. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 10, take appropriate action on a request
Move on
by
10.
Ronald Young, Edux, to rezone from general commercial to ag to allow residential development in the 6,000 block of C. Corbella Road in Ward 8.
To uphold planning and zoning.
The Planning and Zoning Board met on Monday, July 18, 2016, and voted unanimously to recommend that the request be granted. I got a motion by Mr. Latour to uphold and a second by Ms. Mayo. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 11, take appropriate action on a request by Jerry Demary, Edux, to rezone from mixed residential to light commercial to allow light commercial development. It's going to be a convenience store at 105 Phillips Road in Ward 4.
Move to uphold zoning
Second.
and planning with
Planning
stipulations.
and Zoning Board met on Monday, July 18, 2016, and voted unanimously to recommend that the request be granted with stipulations. Got a motion by Mr. McMillan and a second by Mr. Guidry to uphold, including stipulations. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 12, take appropriate action on a request by Joyce Perron to rezone from mixed residential to light commercial to allow light commercial development, another convenience store at 3329 Davis Road in Ward 4.
Move to uphold zoning board with stipulations.
Second.
Planning and Zoning Board met on Monday, July 18, 2016, and voted unanimously to recommend that the request be granted with stipulations. I got a motion by Mr. McMillan to uphold with stipulations and a second by Mr. Guidry. Mr. McMillan.
Hey, these are contiguous lots.
Yeah, they're
side by
contiguous.
side.
That's right, they're
And
contiguous
so
lots.
this is going to be a really nice convenience store right there and a piece of property that has a lot of traffic. So it'll be a good thing, very well built, very well nice. Looking good. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Is there any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 13, let's see, it was voted to be deferred by the Planning and Zoning Board. Do we know how long, Mr. Crane?
30 days.
30 days?
Yes, sir.
All right, we'll come back to that next month. Item 14, is that our?
We have speakers.
Item 14, take appropriate action on a request by Susan LaFleur et al. To rezone from mixed residential to
Move to
recreational
uphold the
vehicle
zoning
park
and planning to.
to allow a
request.
recreational vehicle park of 130 spaces in the 2800 block of Old Highway 171 in Ward 3. The Planning and Zoning Board met on Monday, July 18, 2016, and voted 4 for and 5 against to recommend that the request be denied. We have a motion by Mr. by Mr. Calvin Collins to uphold, and a second by Mr. Anderpont. And we have a number of speakers on this item. Before we get started, I'll just ask that, you know, this is the toughest thing when people have to come down here and something's going to affect your home or your your family's property or something like that. So we just asked, we want to show everybody respect. Please don't clap or boo or all of those type of things. We ask that you refrain from doing that. First, we're going to hear from the applicant, Mr. Charles Jones. Mr. Jones here. Mr. Jones, if you would, please state your name and address for the record, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. President and members. My name is Charles Jones, and I'm a resident of Monroe, Louisiana, 1605 Lammy Lane, Suite D, Monroe, Louisiana.
Okay, Mr. Jones, I will ask you, do you know about how long your presentation is going to take? 10 minutes, you think? Would that be enough time for you, or?
Mr. President, if we could have another 5 minutes or so at the outside, I think we could do it within 10.
Yeah, there'll be some rebuttal time at the end.
Okay.
We'll start off about 10 minutes. If you go over, we'll work with you.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. President, members. I represent, on behalf of Ms. Susan LaFleur, as well as the Kupke Investments, LLC, who has made an application for the granting of a rezoning petition with respect to this piece of property. I have with me this afternoon, and on behalf of Ms. LaFleur is present here. He will stand. Okay. And Ms. Kupke, who is the president of Kupke Investments, LLC, and her husband, Mr. Kupke. Mr. Venable, who is the realtor of this property, as well as Mr. Eric Connor, who is the engineer, and Attorney LaCosha Roberts, who is here as well. As you're aware, on last evening there was a meeting with the Planning and Zoning Board, and by a vote of 4 to 5, the request was denied. We respectfully request that you overturn that decision. We believe that based upon our investment, based upon our research, that this project will add immeasurably to Calcasieu Parish. I'd like to we have several exhibits that we want to point out. First of all, what I'd like to do is ask Attorney Roberts and Ms. Kupke to come and help me with this, if you would give leave to do this.
That's fine, sir.
Do we have anything to set those on?
Easel?
Do we have anything we could set those on?
Yeah.
We had an easel.
First picture is a picture of the property as it is presently situated. The property, as you're aware, is on Old Highway, Highway 171, Old Ritter Highway, and Louisiana 3059. This is the piece of property that is designated in this area. And of course, we will make it available. We'll make it available to pass it around such that all of the members can have a close-up view of it. This is the way the property is presently situated. These 12 acres of the property are the acres that we seek to have rezoned.
And we may not need to, can all the jurors see it? Everybody's good?
Yeah.
I think everyone can see it.
Okay. If you need to have it available, of course, we'll be glad to pass it out so you can get a closer view of it.
I already know what it is.
It's just going to be the picture. So,
The next picture is a picture of the how the RV resort-like project. We're saying that it's resort-like because it is not the usual RV camp or RV park. This project is going to be a multi-million-dollar project, and it will have those features. The Water District has allowed for 130 units, and that's what the request is for. And this is the same property. The same property that I just pointed out on this picture is reflected in this picture, and of course, it too will be available for further close inspection. This drawing is of the same piece of property, except it has the unit designation and more specific details setting out where the 130 units will be placed within the construct of the 12 acres. Mr. President, members, this is a rendering. This is not drawn to scale, but this is a rendering of what this proposed project will look like. And I'd like to take just a few minutes to point out what those features are that we believe are distinguishing features from a regular RV park that would be placed in this community. It, as I said, is a multi-million-dollar project, and it will certainly enhance the community as well as, we believe, enhance the values of the property. These features include, but are not limited to the following. First of all, it would be a gated community. This is the key access right here. This is a gated community. It will have a fence that completely surrounds the project. This fence alone will cost over $50,000 to enclose this property. The intent was to make sure that we mitigate against any noise or any lack of security, as well as any other outside problems. It would be also surrounded by palm trees. It would be surrounded, also have a water feature here as a flowing fountain, waterfall. It will have a building that would be between 3,000 and 4,000 square feet that will include, when our CPA, and I forgot to mention this last night, when our CPA was doing a differentiation or a contrast, if you will, between the some of the features of just a park and a resort, from her CPA legal perspective, it indicated that in this building, that would be, as I said, will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, will not be something thrown together. In this building would be an office. In this building would be a laundry. In this building would be an exercise unit. In this building will be a place for equipment and for a golf cart that will be used to meander the property. And I'd like to say this, Mr. President and members, this property will be secured from 6 at night till 6 o'clock in the morning. Will be an off-duty Calcasieu Parish Deputy Sheriff or Lake Charles police officer. This property will also have all of the lighting features will be inside of the property as opposed to outside of the property. All of the persons who will participate from a financial perspective will be from Calcasieu Parish. That is, the attorneys from Calcasieu Parish, the developers from Calcasieu Parish, the engineers from Calcasieu Parish, the deputy sheriffs and police officers from Calcasieu Parish, the office managers from Calcasieu Parish, and this multi-million-dollar project will inure to the benefit of Calcasieu Parish. We want to make it as beautiful as possible such that it will have all of the aesthetic values of a resort as well, resort-like, I might add. This picture is a picture from the old DeRitter Highway entrance, which will be the back, looking from the rear of the property, looking forward to the property. You will see that when you look from the old DeRitter Highway position, you will see that there is a continuous fence, which will be 8-foot fence tall with dog ears It will be surrounded by vegetation, be surrounded by plants, and it will be, the back of what you will see is, you will see a fountain and waterfall. You will see that's what you will see from the back of the property. And as I said, the property will be completely surrounded by this fence. I would say that the property already is mixed residential. I met with the president. I want to say that several months ago when we started this project, I made a point to make sure that we talk to the stakeholders here in Calcasieu Parish, that we had a chance to meet with some of the police jurors. I had a chance to meet with the mayor of Lake Charles, with whom I had served in the legislature, and he indicated that he was supportive of the project and that he would do anything that he could to be helpful. I also met with the president of the Calcasieu Parish Chamber of Commerce, and he indicated to me, even as late as yesterday, that there is a need for between 14,000 and 17,000 housing needs in Calcasieu Parish. And I'd just like to reemphasize again that this project is designed to enhance the community. It's not designed in any way to have a deleterious effect or have a detrimental effect on the community. That is not what this project is intended to do, and that is not what we will do. And of course, the recommendation of the planning staff was that it be granted with the caveat that we would have to comply with the traffic and as well as the drainage impact. And of course, we're committed to do just that. I would also like to point out that we took every effort, again, Mr. President and members, we took every effort to make sure that the community is protected and the residents are protected. We hold that inviolate. We realize that that is important, and so as a result of that, that's one of the reasons we put on the Old Dorita Highway, we want to make sure that there was no access, no ingress and egress, to make sure that there was not any traffic, no way of traffic coming out of that particular property, as I hurry to a close. So with regard to security, we've also indicated that we would have a criminal history background check. These will not be transient people who just come in and come out, that there would be some stability to that. We also will have a manager and a code of conduct, and we ask that this request be approved consistent with the recommendation of the planning staff with respect to drainage and traffic impact.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Gabb, where are we on time? About 11 minutes?
12 minutes, Mr. President.
12 minutes? Okay, thank you. If you would just stay, we may have some questions from some of the jurors. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe you covered this, but I just want to confirm. So you said there will be security there from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.? Is that what
Yes.
you said?
Yes, sir.
Or wait, what did you say? 6
p.m. to 6 a.m.
to 6 a.m. And then throughout the day, there will be some kind of staff at the location. So if there's an incident, someone's going to be there to call the authorities.
Yes, sir. We will have a complete staff. We'll have an office manager. We'll have an assistant office manager. We'll have a security person. We'll have a maintenance person, and they will be there all day. And one of the key things, Mr. Hunter, is that we wanted to make sure that we emphasize that these people would be secure both inside as well as the community outside. So that's the reason we want to make sure that it's expensive. I'll reemphasize this, if I might. This is a multi-million-dollar investment in this project. And I will go on and say this. I have leave from Ms. Kupke to say this, I believe. And I want you to know that the bank has approved. This is not a pie in the sky. This is not something that may happen if we are blessed to be granted with this evening. But the bank has approved it, and the money is available. And depending upon you all's judgment that they would be ready to go.
Thank you. And if I may continue, Mr. President?
Continue.
I know we want to give some time to the opposition, so if you can just answer these quickly. There will be a fence completely around the property, set at 8-foot fence. And I noticed there was some vegetation. Is that vegetation going to be completely around the property, or is that just around where it borders the street?
No, sir, Mr. Hunter. What we've done is we've engaged a landscape architect, just as one would use in their home to draw out the plan and put all of the flowers and trees and all of these things in place, such that, so it's not, even though it is a picture in terms of a projection of what it will be, it does adequately, I can represent this to you, it does accurately represent the fact that it would be, when we had the rendering crafted, we indicated to them we wanted it to be as beautiful as possible and enhance the value, not only the value of the project, but also enhance the value and be an asset to the community.
I understand, Mr. Jones. Mr. Crane, would these be, these images that we're looking at, would these be part of the plan that y'all are going to accept?
Yes, sir, we can. As Mr. Jones indicated, these are fairly conceptual drawings, and so we would obviously make sure that whatever we're reviewing are realistic.
Yeah, I'd like to know that what I'm voting on tonight, what I'm looking at is what we would actually see.
It would be a representative of that.
Okay. And Mr. Crane, how long do we allow RV spaces to stay?
180 days.
180 days, okay. But that is something that is tough for us to police.
It is.
In every, so y'all will be abiding by that? That 180 days would be the longest that someone could stay?
Yes, sir, Mr. Hunter, we will.
And how would you be checking on that?
Okay. We will abide by what this police jury dictates to the police jury and the state of Louisiana state statute and the federal government laws. All of the ordinances, laws, rules, and regulations, we will abide by. We will have a person on staff. We have a staff in place, and they will be there every day. And whatever the rule is with respect to the length of time, it will be strictly complied with, because we will have that relationship, not only in terms of abiding by the law and by the rules and regulations that you all set, but also that the Civil Code, as you're aware, has a specific section that deals with RVs and what those are, whether they are called tenants, or whether they're called residents, and it differentiates between them, and we would comply with that law.
Right, so I just want to confirm on record that your staff will be monitoring if someone's there over 180 days, that your staff would go and tell them it's time to move on. This is not supposed to be a long-term housing solution for these RV parks, correct?
That's correct.
Am I correct, Mr. Crane?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that will be what y'all are planning on doing?
Yes, sir. We will have a person in place to monitor every feature to make sure that it is compliant with the local ordinances of this police jury, with the state statutes, and with the federal government.
Okay, thank
We
you.
will have, that's one of the reasons I wanted to point out,
Finish,
if I might,
Thank you.
that we will have the NCIC do a criminal history background check of these residents. I realize that's not attractive to some people, but
Okay.
we want to make
Thank you,
sure that
Mr.
what we
Jones.
bring
That-
to this
did that
community
answer your question,
is what we
Mr.
need.
Hunter?
Yes, sir, very
Okay,
well.
thank you. We have some more questions. Mr. Farnham.
Thank you, Mr. President. I see that on the drawing here, there's one gate, looks like for an emergency access on what would be the north end, I guess. On the plot plan. None of the other ones show any gates. Do they all have gates? They're completely encased in a gate? On that plan there, looking to the far, I guess, right.
I think Mr. Connor can answer. Would you like to answer that, Mr. Connor?
Farnham.
State your name and address for the record, Mr. Connor.
When I wasn't 60, I could have seen that. Yes, Mr. Farnham, but I'll have Mr. Eric Connor, who is our engineer, can address that and why that is the way it is.
Mr. Connor, if you would, please state your name and address for the record, please.
My name's Eric Connor. I live at 3200 Vincent Road, Lake Charles.
Thank you.
There was some concern about access onto the old DeRidder Highway and a means of being able to limit that access on the old DeRidder Highway. They still wanted to have access on it if an emergency situation showed where maybe some roads were blocked, they needed to get an emergency vehicle in, that this would be a gate that could be opened, but it's not to be used on a routine basis.
I guess that's what my question is it doesn't show any gates on any of the other entrances. And would every entrance be gated?
My understanding, it was a gated community.
And,
That's-
and along with that would come a gate on the other side of the highway that only has 4 spaces?
Yes, sir. My understanding that all the entrances were going to be gated.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farnham. Are there any further? Mr. Guidry.
Just a quick question. Mr. Jones, I know you had mentioned something about background checks. Can you do background checks on private entities such as RVs?
That has to be done through the local law enforcement. And if you have a business, you can request a criminal background check on persons through the local sheriff's office.
Okay.
Of course, whatever the costs are, the public doesn't incur that cost. You'd have to incur that cost.
Okay. I want to ask a question.
Is that all, Mr. Guidry?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Farnham.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess of all the sites in all of Calcasieu Parish, this is the most attractive site that y'all found. There's a lot of residential area that abuts this just about in every direction. I know there's some businesses in the area, but this is the most attractive piece of property y'all could find in Calcasieu Parish for an RV park.
Mr. Farnham, it was and is an attractive feature, and I want represent to you that somewhere in Calcasieu Parish there's not a more attractive feature. I can't say that, but I can say that this property was available for purchase by Ms. LaFleur and her relatives, and we believe that based upon the access to the property, based upon the convenience, that it makes it a very attractive piece of property, notwithstanding the fact that it's going to be very, very costly to develop this property. And Mr. Venable, who is the realtor here, can attest to the fact that in that area, since you mentioned that area, if I might respond to that part of your question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. With respect to that area, the local businesses in the 1 mile radius includes an auto parts, a salvage yard, and what appears to be a shop that repairs school buses adjacent to the proposed RV resort park. And just down the road, a 1/4 mile, is a mobile home park. The property is presently zoned as R2 mixed residential, which allows for a modular home, which allows for manufactured home subdivisions, is presently zoned to allow that as well. And
I know part of the thing that's trying to be solved in the parish is the lack of temporary housing, which in my opinion should be located as close to the work as possible. And this is a considerable drive to any of the industries that are expanding in the area. And I guess that just the proximity to the work that is being done in the area is not very close. So what attracted you to this area?
Well, it's my understanding that the property is situated, has reasonable access. Some of the properties that are presently used as RV parks or resorts are an hour. In fact, Mr. Kupke is going to, who's part of this investment, is working in Calcasieu Parish, and he has to drive an hour and 15 minutes every day. And where this property is located is is within 15 miles or 15 to 20 minutes to some of these areas that make it much more attractive than persons having to drive an hour or 45 minutes every day. Mr. Kupke tells me that he has to drive an hour, then park his car, then get on a bus, and then pass by his car down to the plant, and then take the bus back to his car. And this is the kind of thing that that would be ameliorated or be, but in terms of the location of the property, we believe that it has access that would make it conducive.
I guess the majority of the expansion that's going on at the moment is all on the west side of the Calcasieu River. And the bridge situation in this parish is going to be a nightmare for the next 3 years. So this would basically add to the nightmare of getting all those cars across the bridge and to a workplace on time in the morning.
Mr.
Y'all
Farnham?
taking that into consideration?
Yes, sir. Mr. Farnham? I was in the state legislature 28 years. There are places in Louisiana that would trade this nightmare today. The mayor told me that this was something that he would support full force, and I believe that it will add to the community. I understand that trying to make housing available, when you potentially bring in between, according to Mr. Swift, with the Lake Charles Chamber of Commerce, when you allow for housing for potentially between 14 and 17,000 people, that is...
I understand all the numbers. I don't agree with the numbers, but I understand the numbers. So thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Farnham. Mr. McMillan?
Maybe our staff can tell me, I don't know, it's a question I have a little bit of heartburn on, but how long does it take to get a background check done? Does anybody on our staff know that?
I'm not sure. Bowley?
I can tell you that we've had to do that through our juvenile justice services and a couple other departments. And there are different levels of background checks, one being NCIC. They're not a very quick turnaround unless there's a process that I do not know about. But even law enforcement has to have a pretty quick turnaround. It does take a while.
So, back to our question, my question at hand. I thought it was a public RV park, but you're telling me that we're going to background check everybody that comes into this RV park. So if somebody's coming in, they pull up, they got a nice RV, said, hey, we want to rent a spot. But you can't rent a spot until we do a background check, and that's going to take, from what my staff's telling me, a little bit of time. Is that something y'all thought about?
Yes, sir, we did, Mr. McMillan, and there are, under the state of Louisiana, state statutes dealing with RVs and dealing with whether or not you're a resident or whether or not you're an occupant. If you're a resident, that's for 30 days or less. If you're an occupant and you go up to I think it's 6 months, then of course, then you become an occupant. Obviously, the manager of this place would have to have some wisdom and discretion with regard to immediate, but to represent to you that immediately that would be, quite frankly, probably impractical to do, even though we want to make sure that I don't know of any such situation project today. But we want to make sure, and I want to ensure the people in the community that if these people are going to have any degree of perceived permanence, that they have a background check, because even though it is a blessing to have all these jobs here, it also needs to be tempered with the fact that the people are protected. That is our thought.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Okay, is there any further questions for Mr. Jones? Thank you, Mr. Jones. Okay, let's see. First, we're going to hear from Mr. Brian Araby. And we'll have 12 minutes to divide among, let's see, we have 2 speakers, so if y'all want to do 6 minutes each, or I think the second gentleman only has a couple of minutes, so we can go up to 10 with Mr. Araby if you want to keep track, Mr. Gaff. And of course, just for informational purposes, when the jurors are asking questions, that time does not go against either side. Mr. Araby, if you would, please state your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. Brian Araby. I live at 383 Granger Lane, Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Araby.
And I'm here on behalf specifically of Mr. Dennis and Carla Guillory, who live at 2954 Lakewood Lane. But they've gone out, and a number of the people in the area, and they've collected a number of signatures on a petition opposing this. In fact, the number's at 332. And if I could I just get a raise of hands of those folks who are here in opposition? So in an effort to sort of help you guys move along with what you need to do, they've asked me to come and speak on their behalf. So these folks are all folks that live in the immediate neighborhood and vicinity of this proposal. They, like most of us, they all, their largest investment is their home where they live. And it's a pretty diverse group of folks. And this has been a residential area for many, many years. And it's currently zoned as residential. And these folks all made investments in these properties where they live with the idea and under the expectation that there was some permanence or stability to that. And so that's one of their chief concerns for coming here and for opposing this. We all understand the needs of temporary housing in the parish, but the concern from these folks is that it's, if this is allowed, then it's at their cost and their detriment. And so there's pretty clear that RV parks in neighborhoods decrease the value of the residential property. And so that's their chief concern here. And so we've got a proposed RV park. It's, again, in an area that's been residential for 50 to 60. I've got one family that's been there for upwards of 70 years. And the understanding that they have from talking to folks is that it's about a 20 to 30% loss in property values if this zoning change were allowed. So, there's a number of other concerns, I think some of which perhaps could be addressed by studies, but there's an existing drainage, natural drainage that runs through this area. There's a flooding problem in this area like there is in a lot of areas of the parish, and there's some real concern about, it's currently wooded, it's low, and filling this in is going to displace that water onto somebody. Other concerns that they've raised, of course, is, and the zoning board, by the way, was able to see a number of photographs and maybe a part of what's available to you there of that flooding. And so anyway, again,
Mr. Araby, I think they've got it on the screen. Is that what you're referring to?
Thank you. That's it. That's correct. And those photographs, I understand, were taken just recently, within the last 3 months. I think that's one of the big rain events we had there in May. So we understand the need, again, for making available housing and meeting this need in our community. We're just here to ask that it not be on the backs of these folks. And there's a lot of land and a lot of area out there. There was a number of zoning requests that came up before the board last night that were in rural areas, and there was nobody here to oppose any of those things, and that's because there's no neighbors. There's nobody living within feet of those projects. And so that's where we're at here tonight. We're just trying to preserve our investment, preserve our property values, and we think there's probably more appropriate places for a development of this type. So that's all I have. I'd be glad to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Araby. Do any of the jurors have any questions for Mr. Araby? Thank you, sir. Next, we have Mr. Dennis Guillory. Mr. Guillory, if you could, please state your name and address for the record, please.
Dennis Guillory, 2954 Lakewood Lane, Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Guillory.
This is my wife, Carla Guillory, same address. What she's holding up here is, I don't have any laminations for you, but all these little X's are residences. These are people that have been living out there up to 100 years. Not them personally. We have one 90 years. But we've been living there for 40-plus years. My wife lived on that property for 70 years. The flooding you saw was mostly my backyard and the drainage that goes to the property that they're trying to put this park on. And it's a natural drainage. It goes right through it. And when it don't flow through there, it flows back to the acreage behind us. There's about 20 acres that drains right through that property. And we certainly wouldn't want it blocked. Thank you. Another thing that hasn't been mentioned is there's a pipeline through it, as you know. Pipelines are inherently dangerous. And the more people you put around a pipeline, the more danger there is. And I don't know if anybody can see this, but where they have that pipeline drawn is about 30 or 40 feet off. That kind of concerns me, because it's actually 200-something feet on one side, and the other side's 80. Well, 120-something with the right-of-way. We also have multi-million-dollar investments. Our people, these people, have an investment in the property. We visited a lot of them, had 332 sign our petition. We had, I think, one person that turned us down because he worked at the grocery store out there. Everyone else was against it. And I'm talking about the people that lived in the trailer lines, the people that lived in the neighborhoods behind us. We have 35 homes directly around this thing, and we're going to be lit up like a Christmas tree. I think that's all I need to say. I appreciate your time and appreciate your vote.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gilroy. Are there any questions for Mr. Gilroy? Thank y'all. Okay, we will have, let's see, we'll go up a maximum of 5 minutes on the rebuttal. Mr. Jones, if you would like to come up, if you have anything else to say, you don't have to. It's up to you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members of the Calcasieu Parish Police Jury for the opportunity to present to you this evening. I'd like to again ask Ms. LaFleur to stand. She is the petitioner. Would you stand up for us? This is Ms. Susan LaFleur. Will the other heirs and persons who are petitioners, would you stand, please? But Ms. LaFleur has indicated that, and she would present except that she has a disability.
I think she sent an email to us.
Okay, all right, great.
I think everyone received that.
Okay. But she has indicated that, that this project will not cause any additional flooding, that she's on the property, her heirs are on the property for a substantial period of time, and that the conditions are what they are, but that this will not contribute to it. Let me hastily try to get to the points that were not covered and that were mentioned. The realtor, Mr. Venable, has indicated that with respect to the criminal history background check, that there is an acronym called TWIC, T-W-I-C, which is Transportation Work Identification Credentials, that can be gotten within I think it said we got within 24 hours or some very short period of time. But with respect to the allegation,
Randy Venable, and I reside at 2340 Lake Street. The TWIC card is all the people who work in the plants usually have to have that to get, especially if they're by any terminals of the waterway terminal. Very intensive background check on that. I use investigative research background check because I property manage for some of my clients for residential rentals, and I do the criminal background check, make sure we're not putting a sex offender in the neighborhood, things of that nature. And it only takes me about an hour to get that information. Thank you for your time.
Also, with respect to, let me hasten to say, with respect to whether or not the property would depreciate in value, that is not the intent of this project. In fact, within the last 5 years, there has been only one sale in June of 2011, only one sale. And that sale in that property sold for 1/3 of the listed value. The property, and I'm sure you probably have seen pictures of the property in its present situation. But this property will be enhanced in value because this multi-million-dollar investment will enhance the community rather than take from the community. You saw this, what was interesting to me was that you had this petition that was presented to you that allegedly had 332 people. And then on testimony, it was discovered that there were 35 persons in the community. I don't know where the other 300 signatures come from. When I was in the legislature, we used to get petitions from 10,000 people who lived in Iowa. So I understand that petitions can be signed. The streets, I would like to say this, that the streets in this project are all concrete. They're not asphalt. They're not rock roads. They're not dirt. They are concrete for permanence to give the appearance of a subdivision. And with respect to the question regarding the legal servitude, there's a reason they call it a legal servitude, because there's nothing that you can do about it. Pipelines across your property, in the common law, they're called easements. In Louisiana, they're called servitudes. So I'd like to just say, Mr. President, as I wrap up, that we have presented this multi-million-dollar project for your consideration. We have done all that we could do. We met with the police jurors, some of the police jurors in the area. We met with the mayor of Lake Charles. We met with the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and we have tried to comply with all of the strictures and all the requirements that were set out by the planning staff. And we realize that we're at your mercy, but we ask that you give the opportunity to complete this project. And the reason is...
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Your 5 minutes is up. All right, are there any questions for Mr. Jones? Any further questions?
No, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Araby or Mr. Gilry, would you like to come back up and add anything? You have 5 minutes.
I just want to say one thing, that I did a transaction, a sale, or closed on a real estate property in this area. That's how, one of the reasons I got involved in this, because one of the purchasers of that property is out here within the last 6 months. And so the statement about there haven't been a purchase in there since 2011 and 1/3 of the list price or whatever, I mean, I know for a fact that that's not correct. That's the only thing I wanted to correct. And then the other thing is the petitions are there. I'd be glad to pass them out if you cared to look at them and see the signatures and the addresses on them. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Araby. Okay, any of the jurors have any further discussion, any questions? I'm sorry, sir, your time is up. Is there any further discussion by any of the jurors? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Madam Secretary?
The motion.
Let me repeat had a motion by Mr. Collins, second by Mr. Andrew Pont to uphold, which is to deny. Is that correct, Mr. Collins?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Angelpont?
Yes.
Mr. Ferris?
Yes.
Mr. Brame?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Farnum?
Yes.
Mr. Guidry?
Yes.
Mr. Guillory?
Yes.
Mr. Hunter?
No.
Mr. Latour?
Yes.
Ms. Mayo?
Yes.
Mr. McMillan?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mrs. Trimmy?
Yes.
And Mr. White?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We will, I guess we'll take a moment, about a 5-minute recess.
Works for me.
Works for me. Let the room clear. Thank you.
I'm sorry, that wasn't for you.